Well, it's a poll. It's a very binary question. And it is something that has definitely gone down over the last 5 or 6 years of the whole kind of culture war around the discussion of trans people. And to the extent where we've seen those numbers change from something like 70% down to about 55%, if you look at the British Social Attitude Survey, I think the very fractious war of words over transgender has definitely seen it drop below 50% now. But there is a big difference between asking the question, is a trans woman a woman, and asking, how do we treat trans people in society? Should a trans person in society have access to the same things women have? And where does that start and where does it stop? Because clearly there are situations, prisons, sports, refuges, etc., where those questions may change. And the thing is as well, to even be transgender, you have to acknowledge the sex you're transitioning from. So to me, a trans woman is a trans woman. And as soon as you start doing gotcha questions on, are trans women women, and asking politicians, they're all going to stumble with yes, no answers. When there is definitely a yes, no answer around sex, but there's a kind of, how do we treat and acknowledge you around gender?
Well, Katy Jon, it's always a pleasure to have you on because you're very kind of open-minded about things that get people often quite hot under the collar. And do you think maybe that the changing in societal attitudes, that the hardening in a sense towards this is because people have seen very clear indications of the unfairness? You mentioned, for example, prisons, the Isla Bryson case, the male double rapist who was allowed initially by the SNP to go to a women's jail, and that almost brought down the entire party and caused a huge uproar. Do you think that people are now seeing these things, if you like, with the full glare of publicity, and that's what's actually making them think this is just a bit unfair, and it's not fair towards women in particular?
Well, we have these laws, the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, the 2010 Equality Act. And for many years, we were living quite comfortably for the smaller number of people who were trans, kind of accommodating them in society. The Equality Act is literally about reasonable adjustment, making accommodations, and particularly in the public sector, kind of the public sector duty to foster good relations between the various protected characteristics. And as we now understand through some cases in court, that gender critical beliefs are to be accepted as a protected characteristic as well. So there is a public duty to foster good relations between both those people who don't accept that trans women are women and those that believe they are or want to be treated as. And it's trying to find, how do we create a coexistence in society that allows everyone to happily get on with things? But that does mean then being willing to discuss, to debate, to look at applications and situations. The Equality Act itself has a whole bunch of cases and kind of descriptions in its notes about when and where you can and can't exclude a trans woman. And that's always been the case, where in relation to prisons, in relation to kind of security pat down, etc. And people have had the rights to kind of interpret the law, but people for the first few years after the Equality Act interpreted everything literally, benignly, favourably, and then there was kickback. And I think we have to move back to kind of what does the balance look like? So that definitely with the prison case, I think it's fairly clear what we shouldn't do, and the policy has now changed. I think with sport, the sport has been changing in dozens and dozens of sports. It's not nice. Trans people need to be active in sport too, but they're not going to be active in a women's plate, as it were. And I think those conversations should be held without getting personal, without dehumanizing people, without getting angry. How can we talk about it?
I'm interested to hear you say, Katy Jon, that if we'd asked this question 5 years ago, more people would have said that a trans woman is truly a woman. What do you think this statistic will look like in another 5 years? Because one might say that raising awareness of the issue has actually entrenched the position that biological sex is genuine, and somehow we have to find a language to represent trans people that doesn't upset non-trans people, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So, for example, the kind of the big war of words at the moment has been from the trans side. I think it's been as wrong for the trans side to come up with this very simplistic mantra and slogan to put on every single demonstration, to send out to MPs saying you must sign this declaration, trans women are women. And then you've had the kickback from the other side saying trans women are men, which is equally true at a biological level. But one is talking about gender, one is talking about sex. And they can say those two things until they're blue in their face. But as with one of your earlier pieces this morning about multiculturalism and British values, what is wrong with finding kind of the nuance of both and recognizing that sex is sex and gender is gender, and not seeing as one trying to overtake the other, but recognizing that there have always been trans people, there have always been gender diverse people, people who kind of broke the rules on gender throughout history, and they need to be accommodated and accepted in society with this humanization, not only with human rights. So I think you have to balance women's rights and trans rights. They are different, and where they intersect, you have to converse. But I do not know how we step back from the language war we have and the political war we have. So you're right. I don't know. In 5 years' time, will it be 10% of people saying it, or will it go back up again? Because I think there is an age demographic to some of the kind of the kickback. And, you know, and if you look at other countries around the world, some are rushing forward with this kind of liberal, progressive inclusion. Hey, I don't care what you call yourself. Let's all just be human together and happy. And then other countries like the UK, the US, and some others where there's a stronger kickback. So I think you can't say it's happening globally. It's
Okay. Thank you. Katy Jon Went. Just fascinating. Thank you so much. It's such interesting insight, isn't it?